Recording has started. Oh, somebody else did it for me. Thank you for whoever did that. Welcome to today. We are going to be talking about Gong Trackers, but so much more. Like, what are the things that we can use with AI to help coach the team and what problems it really solves? I'm joined with Jen from Dropbox, who's going to help give us like real field insights. I'll be coming in with the mentality of how we've worked with many different companies to help solve similar challenge, but Jen is going to keep us honest, going to keep like what actually happens behind the scenes, and then what does it look like to track. If you have questions, one of the things I would love to happen throughout our session today, I know all of you have used Zoom before, but just in case, top right, we're going to be turning on spotlights, and you can pin me. Sometimes I'm going to write on this board and it'll be small, so you can pin me if I'm not spotlighted, or Jen. Or at the top right, you can just go back to grid view and see everybody. We'll ask you to engage. We're going to do a couple different things in chat, so get ready for your fingers in there. But if you have a question, we would love it. Walter is joining us as well. He's going to help navigate the async conversation. So we'll leave some time for questions at the end. But if you have questions during the session, please let us know. Without further ado, Jen, you ready to get started?
Let's do it. Very ready.
I guess I kind of did your intro, but is there anything that the world should know about what your perspective is on what we're about to talk about today?
Well, I would say that I am a huge Gong fan and a Winning by Design fan. We brought Gong into our organization. We're going on about 16 months now or so. And the way that it has transformed the way that we coach our sellers, the way that even like our outside supporting teams better help support the needs of our org has been huge. And when we brought in Winning by Design earlier this year, this has really been like a key area for us to be able to understand how well we're doing, how we're adopting, where my team, the revenue enablement team, really needs to target our efforts. So excited to be here today because this is a topic I'm especially passionate about. In fact, when we were like prepping for this, Dan even was like, whoa, you got a little heated about, this one thing, because I think it can be just such a game changer. So very excited to talk through it today.
All right. Well, without further ado, let's jump right in. I'll start sharing my slides so that we can got a couple different ways that I'm going to try it out. And I see Antoine's with us, so he'll keep me honest with how the tech looks. But let's jump into the slides in the normal way and start going down what we're here to talk about today. So first thing that we'll go through is why methodologies don't scale and what you can do right now to help them scale. And usually to no fault of anybody, it's a natural thing of having different methodologies. But what the one most important methodology is to use is the one that you have. Like, it doesn't matter which language you want to use, but if everybody's speaking it, we can be more effective cross-functionally. Then we're going to get into what does the actual integration look for. So if you're trying to do a transformation or a training or behavior change, it's not enough just to get the training. You got to figure out how to coach. And that's what we'll go into with where trackers fit in versus scorecards. And then we're going to start talking about where the future is on other ways to integrate the tech. But first, let's get started with one of the problems. So what you see on this big, beautiful screen is that from left to right, it's typically how we think about the revenue organization. On the left side is going to be marketing, prospecting. In the middle, it gets to where we earn our commitment with our clients, all the way through the right side, which is going to be growth, starting with onboarding and adoption, and then expansion through cross-sell, upsell. And as you see, all of these beautiful little acronyms or ways of approaching a process are different. And as you grow in a company, you may change what type of go-to-market motion that you have, or where your product market fit might be slightly better for a different type of methodology. But the problem is that most of these don't actually interface with each other. So let's go to the field. Jen, this will be the first time we talk real talk. What has been your experience of seeing companies grow on having these different types of methodologies throughout the organization?
Well, you go through any sort of M&A and you're bringing in a different methodology along with that organization that you're bringing under yours. And we had that same thing. We'd gone through a couple of acquisitions over the past probably about 4 to 5 years or so. And so when that happens, we have a sales force coming in who has a different methodology than what we have. And then I think the other thing to think about too, when you're in a bit of like a growth mode, you also have sellers coming in with their own unique methodologies from their respective organizations. Unless you're hiring somebody super green right out of college, you're probably coming in with a certain set of experience as it relates to the selling methodology. And so we, like what you see on the screen, we had that exact same thing. We had pockets of sellers that were adhering to one methodology. We had leads who were really enforcing what they knew. And as a result, we had pockets of success. We had those that weren't. It also just made it really challenging to have a common language and a common understanding of what a successful development of an opportunity actually looks like. And it's a big part of the reason too, why for us, Dan, you called out like the best methodology is the one that you actually used. We had all these different methodologies kind of floating around, and then like no one was really using any of them, or they were using like little snippets here and there, but there was no commonality throughout our selling work.
And it's like no one's fault when that happens, but that's such a big part of like why companies don't hit targets or goals, or why things like artificially get slow. And then everyone gets frustrated because it's just like bulky and like, then we get infighting, and sometimes people blame like marketing or sales or whatever. It's like, it's not really about that. It's more process than people issues. And I think it's rooted in this lack of shared adoption of a single methodology. But just to make our point, I'm going to pop something in the chat. I want everybody to start popping in. What are some methodologies that you're currently using at your company? Because I imagine there's more than one. There's no standard for, let's say, a CS, customer success methodology that everyone uses, or that also can be used for the sales process. As a plug, we hope Spiced is that solution. We hope that Spiced is considered by companies ways to evolve it, but we'll make that argument, I think, throughout our talk today. So Spiced all day, thank you. Antoine coming in hot. Yes, MedPick is very, very common. We're hearing a lot of people, because it's open source, there's a lot of different, like Jen was saying, leaders that come from a medic or MedPick background and like, oh, this works over here and I'm coming in. And so now my 30, 60, 90-day strategy will be like, let me add it into the mix because I know it works. But Medic is only really focused on almost like the manager style of like seeing where opportunities come in. But we have a slide for that. So let's go in on how do these methodologies start working as frameworks versus what I'm starting to get really intrigued about is where it fits in as an interface. So just to set the stage, as you can imagine, there's going to be all different types of ways of why methodologies can be challenging. It's not just product lines or siloed organizations or departments, but it can also be geographies and what people are comfortable with. But what we need to do is start figuring out what is the process that we can operationalize to help everybody get alignment. Nobody wants to not use a methodology because they think they're so much better than everybody else, or they don't believe, like, I guess sometimes that could happen, but it's very rare that it's like a personal flex of why you're not using a methodology. It tends to be just like, it's another step, or I forgot about it, or it's not reinforced. So what we'll be rooting on today is the Spiced framework / interface, because this is a shared way of speaking about the same thing. So if you're already a medic shop, you don't have to replace it with Spiced, but Spiced could be the interface to help medic get translated into a way that product teams or post-sales teams could use it. And I think this is the part that I just had an aha moment I'm so excited to share with everybody is like, with AI, with like ChatGPT, now you can do like a deal win, convert it to Spiced, and then you got like Spiced as a persona generator that will help product marketing or marketing teams. Or you could use the Spiced to help create a great story and then turn that into a simplified hero's journey using the S, P, and I. And then product can start thinking about what are new ways of building out features and focus on impact. And now by using this language, everybody can speak the same way, but ChatGPT can play a really powerful role in helping translate that. So you don't have to change a lot in order to get the impact. So here's an example of all of our lovely medic or medpic users out there about how this interface can come in. Many sales methodologies or frameworks are still rooted in core fundamentals and using different acronyms. It's not like Spiced is anything completely randomly new that no one's ever thought about before. but it's built in a way that's somewhat unique. Medic on the left is more sales focused. It's actually like a really powerful way of inspecting where a deal is, but it's fundamentally a sales centric framework. On the right side, Spice, you can see how all the things map to it. There's two different decision process or decision criteria, depending on how complex your deal cycle is. But where it becomes really interesting is how do you figure out ways to take the existing information you have in your CRM or customer convos and then turn it into a way that's usable for everybody else on the team. Jen, is there a way that you've seen like this transformation with companies that you've worked with that have started helping combine all of the various frameworks that you mentioned through mergers, acquisitions, M&As, or other things, like how this shared common language can start coming together more efficiently?
I've been fortunate enough in my career to actually go through two similar exercises to what we at Dropbox just went through, where we basically just start with a fresh slate. And I think that, there's a major benefit to taking the time and investing in doing that, because it does give you the common language that you really need. We don't approach any deal with just like one person, right? Like every major opportunity we have, there are so many different people involved. And what I've seen is that having that commonality and that common language and way of approaching a sale really helps to speed that process up. It also helps to make sure that we're just a lot more successful, frankly, in getting to the finish line through that. So yeah, I would say like I've been through kind of multiple iterations of this for Dropbox specifically, and we can talk a little bit more about this. We're still in kind of the early phases of really, getting to this point of a standardized way of approaching our deals and our conversations. But we've already started to see some results in just helping to, involve other team members and really ensuring that everyone's getting the information they need to be most successful in the call.
I think so. What you're leading to is like, how do we actually take the steps to help them be successful? And so I know there's a lot of experiments that you and I have done together, and there's a lot of amazing things that Gong is doing. And we got to start figuring out like, what can we do today? And then what are we about to be able to do? Like what's happening in the next 1, 2, 10 years? And I think we're still on the cusp. There's a lot of powerful things AI can do, but it's not a replacement for human coaching, but it's a really powerful way to augment it. So the first thing that we'll discuss are trackers. And there's now two fundamental types of trackers within Gong: keyword trackers and smart trackers. We'll go into how to set it up and what are some of the pitfalls to avoid. Scorecards, which many people are using in one variety or another, how we use it built out into Gong, and then what can we do to track progress over time. And then the third one, which is more insightful for enablement leaders, appropriately called insights, which is if you're trying to build out a new transformation or you're trying to train a team on a specific skill, how do you track that adoption based on what's actually happening in customer conversations? So how do we set those up to track? Let's dive into it. So the first thing that we want to put in is how to set up scorecards. We're going to start with something that's a little bit more straightforward. Scorecards are a way for you as a human to augment what's happening in the actual coaching. So if you're using Gong already, under the coaching tab, you click on manage scorecards, which is the third one over here. You add a scorecard, bada boom, bada bing. There's two types of questions. The first one is the overall question, which even though it's the first thing that they ask you here, it's the last thing on the actual scorecard. But it's like fundamentally like, at least how I used it in our internal example, is like, was this a good call? 1 to 5. But what I found is to be really valuable, and Jen, I'd love your feedback on what you've seen, is I score it because there's no rubric built into Gong. I try and keep it very simple by having a 0, 1, or 2, and not doing like 5-star. I know everybody's like comfortable with the Uber, Lyft 5-star. I guess everything is 5-star these days. But 0, 1, or 2 is really powerful. 0 is like you missed it. 1 is like you tried it, but something was a little bit off, but like good intent. And then 2 is you nailed it. You did the thing that we were tracking here. So the middle screen or the left picture is how to set it up. On the right side is how it actually looks. And so giving a little bit of example with like both ACE and agenda were there and giving examples on what might be missing, that helps create a consistent scorecard experience so that peers can score each other without it feeling like I'm flexing on somebody else. But Jen, let me come over to you. What have you seen work really well with your frontline managers scoring, enablement scoring, or peers scoring?
Yes, I want to just like underline, asterisk, bold, italic, like whatever we can do to double tap into that idea of keeping it simple. And I have a couple of different schools of thought around why it is so important to not overthink kind of the scoring mechanism of a call. And I actually think that this applies not just to scorecards, but also when we start to talk about trackers as well. We don't want to over engineer these things. We don't want to for a couple of different reasons. The first is, sure, all of us on here can relate. The less we need our managers, our frontline managers, our coaches to think about the card and more that they can focus on the actual coaching piece, the better. We have to allow the frontline leads to really be targeted to what they're coaching to, which leads me to the second point. From an IC or an individual contributor perspective, there is such a thing as coaching overload. And what I mean by that is we take any 30-minute call, we could find any number of things for that individual to work on, perhaps, right? What happens is when we try to coach to too much, it's just like that decision mentality. When I have to make too many decisions or that decision is too big, I don't act. And so what I've really found from a coaching standpoint, especially when we think about scorecards, is the more targeted and more specific we can be, the better. It allows not only the lead to better take that information in, but it also like actually sets up that individual being coached for success. It sets them up for action. It allows us to come back to it and say, hey, this one thing we said we were going to work on, did we do that? Yes or no? And then we continue to refine from that. So I think it's just so important to like, I heard a saying early in my career, don't boil the ocean overnight. And because we can't fix or we can't improve every single thing, but we can make small incremental improvements. The more targeted we can be to that, the better.
Love it. So I tried to do the real-time note-taking of what you said to summarize. You got to keep it simple. The 3 bullet points under keep the frontline managers doing what they're good at, which is coaching. Avoid overloading, which is a very common human issue. It's like try and fix everything, but instead focus on one big thing. So I tried to draw the big number one. That's what this awkward green thing is. But like, what's the one thing? And then if you fix that, usually it has the waterfall effect, which is fixing a lot of the small things that you would want to coach on, but just focus on the one big thing. So I really love that element, that focus for the scorecards. Thank you, Jen. Good. Okay. Anybody else in the chat? I'm going to start transitioning over into the next topic, but if anybody else has feedback on how to make the most of scorecards, please pop that into the chat. Then let's go on to the next thing, trackers. So there's 2 fundamental types. I started calling them dumb trackers as opposed to smart trackers. I realized that's not very nice. So they're called keyword trackers, technically in Gong. But fundamentally what this is that you put in specific words that the transcription software will pick up. This is really valuable if you're trying to teach almost a script or a particular phrase. For example, we had a company-wide training that was focused on how to ask for referrals. And anybody that's customer-facing should know this skill. It's a really powerful and simple question to ask, but it's something that relates to, do you know of anybody else that may benefit from Dropbox, from Sign, from like anything that we're trying to talk about? Is there anybody else that could benefit? It doesn't have to just be on the closing call. It can be in a discovery call if you have a really good connection. It can be during the demo. It can be any customer conversation where you're getting a really powerful conversation going that you think like, oh, they understand the value and they're talking about how people in their departments or cross company or even their peer group could benefit. So using that word, that's a very powerful use case for keyword trackers. Smart trackers, on the other hand, is a way to train the system to think about phrases that are analogous to what you would be trying to come up with. So Jen, let me come over to you. What have you found to be a great use case for smart trackers?
Frankly, for where we are right now, all of our trackers as it relates to Spice live in smart tracker format. And, to your point, and to go back, so our organization is relatively new in our adoption of Spiced. And what that means is like, we're not perfect yet, right? Like nobody ever is, but to get to that point, it's going to take a little time. Our key focus right now is, are the sellers attempting, are they trying, are they understanding the concepts as it relates to spice? So to do that, we can't expect for a seller to word a question specifically and using exact words and phrases. So we have really found success in using the smart trackers to better understand the adoption around our methodology. It allows us to understand, are the sellers applying the concepts? Do they understand what it means to get to impact? Later down the road, might we adhere to very specific questions there? Potentially, but when we think about, how we consume knowledge and how we actually put it into practice, we have to start first with, do we understand the concepts as it relates to each of these key markers throughout our conversation? So we use smart trackers for all of our spiced, key pieces. We use the basic keyword trackers for things like product lines that we're tracking. Competitors are another great one to use a basic keyword tracker for. Anything that is less room for human adjustment, but still, kind of can understand the concept. That's where we leverage the keyword trackers over smart. And we found, we've seen, we even did like a side by side. So Dan actually helped us with this. We had keyword trackers set up for all of the spiced, framework. And then we kind of ran a bit of an exercise, like, let's put up the smart trackers for these and see. And we found that the results we were getting from the smart trackers for this particular use case, they were much more realistic. And it also gave us a little bit more insight into like where we could further dig in from there. So smart has been the way for us to go when it comes to that.
Love it. It's much more flexible. So let's go into now the next topic of like, how would you actually go and build that? So I'm going to try some new fancy technology. Oh, let me move myself over here. So let's talk about a little bit about what to expect on sticking points of applying this at Dropbox. I think when you set up smart trackers, they will ask you to put in a few things, and you have to train the smart tracker. So you'll say like, oh, these are the types of phrases that I'm looking for. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but shorter or simple, same framework that Jen was describing earlier, like keep them simple so the machine can start learning and picking up example transcripts. I think you need at least 500 calls where something like this could be effective so that the system can actually navigate and train itself to listen for the right types of things. But one thing that Jen and I commiserated about is when you're training the system, it's going to come up with a lot of like mediocre or just completely wrong examples of the thing that you're trying to track. For example, if we're trying to set up a smart tracker for pain questions, like are sales professionals asking appropriate pain questions during discovery calls? You can be very specific of the type of stage that the deal is in and the types of conversations you expect. So pain questions during discovery call, we would expect to kind of sound like this. But if it starts pulling in non-related questions or situational questions, or even something that has to do with like objection management, you'd say, that's helpful, but not for this tracker. So you'd say no a lot. I found I was doing this about like 90% of the time, especially on the earlier cohorts. Have you found that too, Jen?
100%. Yeah, I think I felt that same way when I first started to create one. I was like, man, I'm saying no a lot. Is this a bad thing? And it's actually not. Think about it, it's actually like just what we tell our sellers. Like, no's not bad. Like, no's at least an answer. I would rather have a no than have like a question mark associated with it. So I would say embrace the no. I'm also seeing some chat in the chat around the time to set up the smart trackers. And I just want to say, like, I was 100% there with you on that. We didn't actually, I mean, like I mentioned, we rolled out Gong in March of 2022. We didn't actually set up our first smart tracker probably until about April or so, because I was worried about the time. I was like, I don't have time for that. You want me to go through 6 rounds of training the system? What I would say is what at least kind of worked for me. The beauty of that particular exercise, beyond the initial critical thinking needed to give the system the phrases you want to listen to, it's a really good Friday afternoon activity. Like if you're like me by Friday afternoon and your brain is just done, and you want someone to give you a prompt and you just say yes or no, it's a fantastic activity for that type of day. And I found I was actually able to get through probably about 3 trackers within, a decent amount of time. So maybe just kind of consider, like I said, if you have a special times of day where you're like, I need my brain to turn off a little bit and I just want to answer some prompts, really good activity for during
Well,
that
let's
time.
get it, because I remember like the first time that we worked through this one together, you were like, hey, Dan, there's like a 14% conversion rate on this. I'm not so sure. And I'm like, that seems low for what we're trying to do. And then I got real aggressive, and then it spun out a 70% like success rate on it. But then by me getting aggressive, I came up with like every iteration I could think of on trying to capture this one thing. And so I think it over indexed it. And I think where you're talking about that's so fascinating about this is that we're setting up smart trackers to give us valuable insight. If you give it like something way too general, it's going to like the net's going to be too wide. It's not going to be insightful. If you give it something way too specific, that also might be inaccurate for another. But what you're describing is like, you don't have to nail it the first time. You can set this up and train it and then be like, ooh, those prompts, it's pulling in like, I see where it came up with that phrasing, but it's not the right intent. So I need to rephrase the prompts or come up with something else. How it works that I thought was really fascinating that I didn't get at the first time. Oh, actually, let me come back to my fancy share so I can write on it. What I found that was very interesting is when you set up smart trackers, it will ask you to do basically 25 examples at a time. So the Friday afternoon insight is really perfect because ultimately you put in like, hey, here are examples of open-ended questions that are pain related. It will then give you, hey, here's 25 example calls, and it will point to the transcript. And then you have to say like, yes or no, that's an appropriate tag of a pain question. Now, there's some additional things that we put on here as well. Like the negative form of a pain question would be what challenges. So if you put that for the smart tracker to pick up, it may be too broad of a net at first, where it will find challenges during proposal calls or negotiation, versus the intent of this tracker is to use it for diagnosing, so especially during discovery or demo calls. So this is where it gets really kind of fun to go through. It's like, hey, let me take a hypothesis, put it out there. It spits back 25 calls. And then one thing that like nobody really warned me on, but like everybody here, if you haven't done it yet, something that you should know is that it takes the machine like 20 minutes sometimes to digest what you said. And so even though it's kind of fun to go through the 25 things and eventually you'll get super fast at it, you'll read it, you'll say yes or no, and you'll go bam, bam, bam. So 25 things can be done in probably like 2 minutes. But then sometimes it takes 20 minutes for the system to digest what you gave it, then find other calls to apply it. And every cohort of 25 calls is supposed to get better. And so if you realize after 3 cohorts, like systems cranking out hits, like this is exactly right, you can stop there. If you're like, it's still not exactly right, so then you would go through more cohorts. Have you found that you're always doing 5 or 6 of those 25 calls?
I think for spiced specifically, yeah, I do typically go through the 6 rounds. But there's other elements, like we also use smart trackers to help us understand like kind of competitive landscape and situation. And so there are some of those that maybe I don't need to quite as much. There was one thing you said I want to like just double highlight too. Trackers are one of my favorite things because they are so low risk. If a tracker, you can put in any hypothesis to a tracker and it will backdate all of that. And so you get like an actual good snapshot. And then if it doesn't work, just delete it. And then if you like feel like in a week you want to come back to it, like, okay, just add it again. It's one of the most, in my opinion, low risk ways to report because we can constantly be iterating on it and changing it and getting it to that point of accuracy. And if the hypothesis isn't correct or it doesn't bring back good results, okay, no problem, no harm, no foul. We just try another one then.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You don't have to worry about nailing it the first time. Just get it going. So let's go into now the next step of it. I know Orla was bringing out, hey, I got a small team, 2 people, like how do I actually get insights from it? So once you've trained, which is the screenshot I'm popping in here, and I'll send out the slides after this. But ultimately it's like, once you trained it, what do you do with that information? And so one example would be tracking the initiative over time. And I thought this is a really wonderful example that you shared with us, Jen, about what the story is of what the tracker is picking up at different stages of a training initiative or reinforcement initiative. So on here, each line is representing a different tracker. So situation, pain, impact, or critical event. So what is the story that you're unpacking with these lines?
Well, one thing you called out, Dan, like there can be a gap, like maybe we're being way too conservative. We're only getting like a 14% adherence rate. Maybe we're being a little bit broad and we're getting a 70% adherence rate. Absolutely. Do we want to narrow those numbers in all day? However, I really try to think less about the specific number and more about the trend and more about the story that it's telling me. So regardless if I'm a little inflated at 70% or I'm way under at 14, if I'm seeing increases over time, those increases are true. They're accurate. The scale of those increases, that might be up for debate. Same thing if I'm seeing decreases. Like we can't argue the decrease. We can argue the number, but we can't argue the direction in which it's going. And so that's something, admittedly, I consistently try to reinforce with my frontline leads and my leadership teams, that we need to think less about the specific number and more about the trend lines and the story this is telling us. In that screenshot that you were just sharing, it made a lot of sense for where we were. You would see spikes when we had major initiatives and coaching activities, and we were pulling teams together. And then you would see dips over time when that kind of fell. And I mean, everyone here, I'm assuming, can understand. March to April, that's end of quarter. We tend to not touch our sellers very much during end of quarter. We want to give them the space to really focus on closing out the quarter strong. So this is where I spend most of my time, and transparently where I'd like to see it, as we look into like July, August, September, like I want to see those trend lines consistently moving up. I'm okay if it drops a little bit for end of quarter, but we got to get it back up, and we need these peaks here to consistently get higher and higher. That's the story that it's telling. We can argue all day whether or not the percentage is correct, but for adoption, which is our biggest focus right now, the more we see that increase, the better job we're doing on that.
I think this solves a lot of the hesitation that I know I had on the numbers, because I think what you taught me that was so valuable is it's about the trend. It's like the macro trend that's going on, and not like still have accurate data, still keep your trackers simple enough so that they're specific on what you're tracking, but don't worry per se at like a standard level of numbers that you're getting out. Care about it in terms of what's the improvement over time. So I really like that summary or that learning that you gave us. Now let's get back into like, what do we do from here? I realize that I probably didn't put in like where in Gong to find these, but there's a tab called Insights, and then you'll just navigate over where to actually find it. Scorecards we talked a little bit about earlier, but I want to put it now in context of how you can think about it in terms of a training initiative. What we're showing on here is a discovery call blueprint rooted in SPICE. So how do you open up a call using ACE agenda, then ask 2 or 3 close-ended questions, pain questions, etc. What's so cool about what Gong tells you is it can automatically find or use trackers, and it will highlight within a call where certain things are happening. So we would expect situational questions and pain questions to usually be more at the front of a call versus impact and critical event questions and even decision process later in a discovery call. And so we can start timestamping where certain trackers are expected to happen, or highlighting if certain things are being done out of order. Where this fits in is that one thing that we can do is just focus on a training initiative. Like let's say we're not getting enough conversion from discovery to demo. We highlight, we're not asking the right types of pain questions, or we're jumping into features. So what are some examples that we can come up with? So the left side would be the process that we teach during a training or a coaching initiative. On the right side would be a scorecard. And these are examples of what you can use that we try to keep it very simple so that anybody can start using this right away. Even if it's a self-reflection scorecard, like, did I say this, yes or no? That way we can focus not on the qualitative feedback, like, oh, this call went really well, but we can now quantify it and start tracking improvement over time. But I know that this is one part that Jen, you and I worked on too, is like, how do we start seeing improvement over time with scorecard? And I think, speaking of feedback and giving them Now we'll give Gong a little feedback on here, but one thing that I wish Gong had that I'm sure they're developing is like, how do we use scorecards to track improvement over time? So there's a workaround that we came up with to do that. So what was that insight that you shared?
Well, I think, and also just transparently, our organization, we're not quite at the point of using scorecards consistently just yet. We have some built in there. We've kind of soft rolled them out to a couple of leads that are extra hungry for them. But we are laying the groundwork and the foundation for really hyper focusing on some specific areas with scorecards. And so one of the things that we're doing as an enablement team over the next quarter and second half of the year is really focusing on helping to build our leads muscle around coaching and having that coaching happen at a regular cadence and kind of a consistent rigor. And we're doing that by focusing on one very specific key area for them to be working on with their teams. So this month, it's all around SP&I. We're providing them with different activities that they can run through their teams, because I think one of the things that's also really important when you think about adherence to the methodology and you think about, how that's really, improving over time, the leads are our force multiplier to do that. So we really have to put our focus in them, ensure that they feel supported, ensure that they have the resources they need to actually coach. The scorecards, though, are something that we plan to more formally roll out in the beginning part of the year. We have scorecards dedicated and built based on role, and then also based on kind of the skill, if you will, within that role.
I had to work on my drawing, but from what you're describing, frontline managers are the key. Yeah. So I think this is ultimately what we're trying to describe is like any training initiative is not on enablement or even trainers to like that can kickstart it. But to get behavior change, it requires reinforcement. Oh, here's a great time to share one of my favorite little slides is like, this is how adult learning works, is that you forget very quickly, especially when you learn something the first time, you forget it. The only way to master a skill is to relearn it, come back to it over and over and over. And so this is where we need to use Gong, not as like a secret weapon to solve everything for us, but as part of the initiative to see improvement. So I want to start figuring out like, all right, where do we do, like you mentioned, like, what are the specific examples? And what you described to me that I realized like, oh, we're talking about like best case scenario. Here's how to use Gong, but like, everybody has a different, let's say, coaching maturity within their organization. And so I kind of want to like just share a common language for us as we're describing is like, based on what we're discussing today, scorecards, trackers, insights, like first identify how mature is your coaching culture. Coaching, like level one is like, you're not coaching. It's like, everybody's kind of looking over their shoulder. They're like hiding. It's like, you're not recording calls. Let's say that's level like you don't want anybody to listen to your calls because like, get out of my business. Not that like, oh, I'm in EMEA and I'm not allowed to do it because of legal reasons. Or like, no, it's like the coaching maturity like is like defensive. That's like a 0. Like I'll score that as a 1. A 2-star is like, all right, I'm like open to it, but it's kind of like ad hoc, like it'd be cool if I got more coaching, but I'm not really putting in that much effort, but the tools are kind of there. That's going to be level 2. Level 3 is going to be more prescriptive. Like, all right, every week we have this type of coaching conversation. And I know I'm going to talk about certain things with my manager. I'll submit calls, but I don't really have a consistent topic in mind. Jen, what you just described that I loved is like, hey, this month we're focusing on SPI. This is level 4. It's like you got a clear understanding of like what the initiatives are. But what's interesting is you can still have that initiative led by enablement or leaders. But if you don't have a consistent coaching process, I'll put consistent here so we remember the theme, then it doesn't really matter because you can't really apply it or you can't really see like or guarantee those trend lines. So 4 is like having the plan, making sure that it's enforceable and you can hold people accountable. But level 5, like the dream scenario is peer-to-peer coaching. This is where we take out, like everybody's like so in love with coaching. They get it, they are hungry for it, but now peers can help coach against it. And this is the part that we were trying to get everybody to. And what I'm excited that ChatGPT will get us to is we have clear rubrics. We can have a system that we get almost real-time feedback, like, hey, score my call. hey, this is how I self-reflected. Can you give it a quick pass? Like, is there anything else that you would see, like the one big thing that could improve on it? And so these 5 levels of coaching maturity can help guide you on where to get started with what to implement with Gong. I imagine Gong implementation is best when you're like between 2 and 3, when you're like, oh, I need something slightly better. Like, it's not enough just that I can record calls, is I need a system around it. I need insights that leaders can get excited about. And then Gong will take you all the way through level 5. But you don't have to do it all at once. Like you said, you don't have to boil the ocean immediately.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever can boil the ocean. I'm still not sure how to use that framework. But what about you? On your thinking about your coaching levels, like, does that feel like a fair description of where Gong could fit in, or how to think about it as an enablement leader?
I mean, at least for me, what you just went through, Dan, that was like an aha moment. I learned something today too, because I think you're so right. You know, for our org, we were arguably maybe in between even a 1 and a 2. We brought Gong on. We started to see that move from a 2 to a 3. We've started to implement now a standardized methodology, an actual outline for our frontline leads to coach off of, a manager playbook to give them a process to understand the coaching. And so we've seen that shift now. You know, I'd say we're probably a pretty solid 3. We want to get to that 4, and man, pipe dream to get to a 5 for everyone. Like, how great would that be?
No, I mean, as Winning by Design, like, we're super pumped on like coaching and frameworks, everything. And like, our sellers weren't there for it. Like, I was like, I came in like super hot at the start of the year. I'm like, all right, 2023, new me, let's do this. And it's super hard. Like, we didn't have the muscle to get the peer-to-peer coaching. So then we went back and it's like, all right, do we have a defined journey? It's like, all right, yes, we do that. But that takes time. And if we don't have the culture of like, oh, you gotta, protect 2 hours a week for coaching, then you don't really have time to do peer-to-peer self-reflection. And with the market changing, I think it's fair that priorities have to shift. And so we have to be flexible with it. And so I think it's okay for a company to be able to, bounce between different levels of priorities change, but we can still have this end in mind that like, this is the dream scenario because this is how we all get faster. And honestly, it's a lot more fun to work in that type of environment.
So true.
So thank you for going through that with me. Let's start wrapping up. What can we do now with all of the learnings that we have? Actually, might want to draw on my screen. So I want to do my fancy share for a second. Okay. So what can you do now? We're going to go into, I know I'm blocking like the left-hand side, but if you want to learn more about what we talked about with the SPICED framework, we have a free course. Actually, since I'm talking about it on that side, I'll move over. So the SPICED framework includes like the blueprints on like what is SPICED, but this drive for a shared language is so powerful. So if you got somebody in marketing or in product and you're like, oh, what is the sales team working on? Like, shoot them over this super quick free online course. I'm sorry, complimentary. That's another tracker we're using instead of free or discount. Like, what are alternative words that you could use? So a complimentary course on how to start speaking about SPICE. If you're looking to take it to the next level, we have a pretty awesome revenue architecture course. This is geared for executives or very senior leaders because it talks about intensive frameworks on what to think about as you architect what's going on behind the scenes. So it's very high level, very strategic, versus the SPICE framework is much more tactical. And then if you're looking to get real crazy, oh, sorry, I got a little crazy myself. The impact sprints could be right for you. Impact sprints is like, hey, we know the market has changed. Like, there's a lot going on. We need to do more with less. However you feel is a positive or negative interpretation of that phrase, but like, things are changing in the market. We need impacts faster. And so one of the big things that we're seeing is like, don't try and do everything all at once, but like Jen so eloquently said, keep it simple. And an impact sprint can be like, 4 weeks, let's get leadership aligned. What is the metric that we want to impact? Let's train and coach for 4 weeks, and bang, we see conversion rate off of one element of our process improve. Don't try and improve everything all at once. So I think thinking through it like that can be a really powerful way of hopefully taking something away from what you learned today. Now let's go into the last slide. If you want more content with us, please connect with us on LinkedIn. Like, Jen, you got a powerful LinkedIn network. I know you're always like providing value or engaging with your audience. Like, connect with us, keep this conversation going. I know Sari, I'm blocking one of the things that you would love, like this research newsletter. We're starting to pump out, like, if you like those bigger picture ideas of like what's going on in the market or what are we seeing as benchmarks or ways to improve, our newsletter is really powerful. So winningbydesign.com/newsletter. Or if you just like hearing us do more of these interactive workshops, like sign up, go to our website. We got all of these. I think we're doing like 2 a week sometimes these days of different topics, different ways to engage. Maybe Sarah, I can kick over to you. What is the next workshop that people can start getting excited for?
Hey, yeah, we're going to be sending out, to your point about the newsletter, we're going to be sending out the newsletter with some upcoming topics. So that's the best way to stay abreast of what those topics are. So check that out, winningbydesign.com/newsletter.
Super awesome. Okay. Then I had a slide that just beautifully said Q&A, but like pretend I'm showing that slide. Let's get into Q&A now. Walter, were there any questions that came up in chat that we forgot to address?
No, but I think we have addressed them all. Anyone has any other questions?
All right, thank you. Yeah, we'll start wrapping this up. So yeah, if there's any other questions, please write them in the chat. But Jen, thank you again for coming on here. It was a pleasure to get your insights about how you're actually using it, some of the real talk of like where the challenges are of implementing trackers. Do you have any parting words, anything that you want to make sure everybody leaves with, saying like, that's something I can do right now?
No, I just think, first off, thank you. This was a great conversation. I hope you all enjoyed it. And just double tapping on, if there's any follow-up questions, like please feel free to connect and find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, I think like the kind of the overarching theme here is keep it simple, keep it easy for your coaches to actually coach. Don't over orchestrate it. And remember, if you've got a hypothesis, just throw it into a tracker. It's not going to hurt anything to add or remove it, but test those theories out.
Love it. Those are all great takeaways. Thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on future workshops, and thank you again, Jen.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.